Welcome to this video from the Consultants Development Institute. If you've already seen any of the videos in this series, then I ask your patience as I repeat some information now that you've already heard. For some viewers, this might be their first video. I'm Carter McNamara, an instructor with the Institute and the presenter in this video that is included in the CDI course, Collaborative Consulting for Performance, Change, and Learning. This course is one of 12 in the series, Foundations of Organizational Consulting. I hope that you've completed the 3 previous courses in the Consulting Practices section of the series. Those 3 courses clearly convey the territory of consulting, including key concepts and roles, primary methods, and best principles for successful and ethical consulting. Also, the previous courses, Understanding Yourself as Consultant and Building Trust, Commitment, and Collaboration, help you to be sure that you fully understand the effects that you and your client have on each other, effects that can greatly influence the success of your consulting project. If you're seeing this video through CDI's learning management system, then this course includes a pre-assessment to test your current knowledge about collaborative consulting. There's also many sources for additional learning and also a post-assessment to do later on to measure your new learning about this topic. The system includes handouts about topics in the videos, and we'll mention the ones for this topic in this video as well. Be sure to download the Learning and Development Journal from the system and have it available during the video because I'll be sharing some very important questions for you to reflect on. It's very powerful for you to write your answers in your journal as well. You might even watch this video with some others and then share your questions, answers, and insights in your journal. That's also a powerful way to learn. And last, I hope that you choose to pursue the Institute's Certificate in Organizational Consulting by taking each of the 12 courses. You can find out more by going to consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org. Now let's look at the outcomes that we're aiming to achieve in this video. We've mentioned collaborative consulting several times in this series, along with its many benefits. The benefits apply to you whether you're an internal or external consultant, and regardless of what type of organizations you consult to. Now we'll delve even more deeply into that process, including to explain the dynamics of the collaborative consulting process and its many benefits to clients and consultants. We'll describe the roles of you and your client, including your shared and individual responsibilities. We'll review how the process occurs with extremely busy clients who might struggle to take part in any type of consulting process. Then we'll look at an overview of the collaborative process, but we'll delve into each of the phases throughout that process. All of this will set us up for going through the remaining courses in the series, which will be about understanding organizations and also how to change them. Let's look now at the dynamics of what goes on within the collaborative cycle. We've learned that very few complex problems are solved merely from the advice of an expert consultant. Instead, they're solved from a cycle of continuous learning between the consultant, the client, and others in the organization. You, the consultant, you bring your specialized knowledge in a certain area, and your client brings his knowledge of the organization. Here's the phases in the cycle. If you act authentically with your client, including being open, honest, and engaging, then your client is much more willing to form a working relationship with you and to trust you. Second, if your client trusts you, then he's much more likely to seriously consider your expertise and methods in consulting. He's also more likely to seriously consider your coaching in the form of thoughtful questions which produce deep reflection for your client and you. Third, as a result, your clients gain much more understanding and learning about their situations and their organization. For example, he is able better to explain the situation to other key players in his organization, to those people whose understanding and commitment he'll soon need. And fourth, because of your client's enhanced understanding and learning, he's now more committed to taking actions to solve the problem and to share the results and learning with you. And fifth, both your client and you assess whether there was progress in the project. For example, whether a specific milestone was achieved or the overall problem was solved. So steps 1 through 5 might be repeated until the client agrees that the overall problem is solved. There's many theoretical underpinnings of this collaborative approach. For example, community organizing has long used the philosophy that people who are being served have to be involved in the effort. For example, Miles Horton of Highlander Folk School or Paulo Freire, who is an adult educator and responsible for educating more people than anyone else in the world. Organization development practitioner and writer Peter Block wrote extensively about collaborative consulting in his book Flawless Consulting. Educator and organization development researcher Edgar Schein described what could be a collaborative consulting philosophy in his writings as well. And then psychologist Carl Rogers suggested a highly collaborative approach in his person-centered psychology. Let's look at the benefits again, more specifically of this approach. The collaborative approach to consulting can result in more accurate decisions because your client is sharing open and honest information about the organization with you and is making decisions in a more open, honest manner. That leads to more internal commitment on the part of your client to act on those decisions. And the collaborative consulting is also very powerful in solving problems because it separates symptoms from causes. Recurring problems are often caused by misconceptions and assumptions. Many times your client does not even realize this. A trusting and reflective relationship is more likely to uncover those mistaken perceptions and assumptions and get to the root cause of problems. And collaborative consulting results in deep learning for your client and you. Deep learning does not come from memorizing facts and getting good grades. It comes from continued reflection on your perceptions, actions, and results. And collaborative consulting cultivates creativity and innovation by encouraging your client and you to continually question, take actions, and reflect. The continued actions generate experiences from which to learn and to test new ideas. These benefits combine to produce more self-reliant clients because the consulting project is essentially a learning lab for them. Clients know they were the ones who took the actions to solve their problems, not you. And as a result, you've achieved one of the most important goals in consulting, to help your clients to solve their problems well into the future. Let's look at the shared responsibilities in this collaboration. And again, we turn to Peter Block to articulate the shared responsibilities in the process, and they apply whether you're an internal or external consultant and regardless of the type of organization you work with. First, the success of the project is an achievement by both you and your client. That's shared. It's not the result of an all-knowing consultant who somehow swooped in and saved the organization. Remember the myths in consulting from the earlier CDI course, Primary Methods and Myths in Consulting? Success is really from a continued collaborative approach between you and your client to solving your client's problem. And decision-making comes from you and your client. In shared discussion, negotiation, and agreement, there's a mutual desire to come to a consensus based on the belief that you and your client both benefit from each other's knowledge and wisdom. And you and your client share in the discovery or diagnosis, as some people call it, and how activities will be done, including what data will be gathered from who and how. Both of you discuss how the data will be organized and analyzed. And both of you also decide how the findings and recommendations will be generated from that data, how they will be shared with others in the client's organization so that all agree on which recommendations to follow. Only your client can implement the plans to solve the problems, but both you and your client monitor the implementation and discuss what to do about their findings. For example, if implementation is behind schedule, then both of you will discuss whether to try to get more resources, extend deadlines, or reduce expectations in the project. In collaborative consultation, both of you are responsible to identify new learning, that is, new knowledge, skills, and abilities gained in the project. Learning comes from continued reflection on your mutual dialogue and on the rich experiences in the project. Now that we've looked at your shared responsibilities, let's clarify what you and your client each individually contribute to the project, regardless of the type of consultant that you are or the organizations you serve. First, you bring your own expertise to the project. For example, your skills in coaching to help sustain momentum and learning, your skills in facilitation to help teams and clients' organizations to become more clear on current priorities and what to do about them. You might also bring your skills in training to impart certain special knowledge so your client can do a current task or a job even better. Most consultants have also amassed many useful materials and tools to share so that they can share them with their clients. A primary responsibility throughout the project for you is to help your client to learn. Regarding your client, he shares information about his organization, including the problems he wants you to solve. He considers your help in the form of expertise, coaching, facilitation, training, and so on. And he decides what to do with that help, including whether to take actions, and if not, to explain why not. He implements the actions that he agreed to, including to lead or help lead implementation of some plans in his organization. He regularly shares status with you so you both can discuss and decide what should be done. Similar to you, your client has a responsibility to learn throughout the project and to reflect on his experiences in his relationship with you. Let's look at how this mutual relationship can be done when a client seems extremely busy. The typical small to medium-sized organization has very limited resources in terms of time, energy, money, and there are often a variety of unexpected competing priorities that suddenly demand a lot of time. And it can be a challenge to get a client to work continually with you in a highly collaborative fashion. So when your client seems to struggle to actively participate with you, consider these guidelines. First, be authentic. Notice that your client is not participating in the project, such as not doing what they said they would do when they said they would do it. Mention your observation to your client. Second, remind your client of the importance of the collaborative approach. In the midst of the day-to-day challenges of leading an organization, your client may have lost perspective on the overall importance of the project. The project may have been replaced by another top priority. So talk with your client to come to a conclusion about the importance of the project for now. And also, recognize the other priorities of your client. Collaborative consulting means that both you and your client work together, recognizing the needs of the project along with your needs and the needs of your client. There will be times during a project when your client suddenly needs to attend to other matters. You will need to recognize those times and with your client, adjust your plans accordingly. And also, integrate your project plans into your client's current activities. So identify opportunities to include project tasks and activities your client is already doing. For example, use regularly scheduled board meetings to work with the board, or use current staff meetings. Now is a good time to reflect on what you've heard so far. So in your learning journal, answer the following question. What might be your biggest challenge in working collaboratively? That is, almost as a partner with your client in your consulting. And how might you overcome that challenge? So pause the video and give some thought, and then perhaps discuss the questions even with peers and write your answers in your journal. Almost any consulting process can be done collaboratively. The collaboration is not based on the parts of the process, but on how the parts are done. Like most consulting processes, the following is based on the action research framework developed by Kurt Lewin many years ago. In upcoming slides in this video, we'll go into each of the following phases in more detail. In the client's startup phase, your client is first realizing that there's a problem or a goal that needs significant attention. And the client might start trying to address it within the organization herself, or might start trying to get help from a consultant. But it's important for you to know what happened with your client during that phase, because you can learn a lot about the problem and about your client. The contracting phase is your first meeting with your client, and the goal is to understand each other and decide if you want to proceed together in a project. If you decide that the client is really ready for a project and that your styles and capabilities match, then you both proceed with the project as well. In the discovery and feedback phase, you and your client work collaboratively to further examine the client's problem and what can be done about it. You carefully collect data, analyze it, and feed back those findings and recommendations to others in your client's organization to get their agreement as well. In the action planning phase, you and your client develop action plans to solve the problem, including to specify objectives along with who will do which ones by when. You make sure your various action plans are integrated with each other. to avoid duplication and ensure that all plans are efficiently focused on solving the problem. And in the implementation phase, your client implements the action plans according to general principles for successful change in organizations. You guide and support the client during this phase to sustain motivation and momentum. In the evaluation phase, you and your client conduct hopefully a systematic evaluation to ensure that your client's problem has indeed been solved and that any new systems and practices to solve the problem have been adopted as well. And in the termination phase, you and your client reflect on what was achieved, what was learned along the way. You and your client will attend to any loose ends and will likely formalize documentation to specify that the project is terminated. We should mention that there usually is no clear distinction between the phases. Rather, they're highly integrated. The phases can be cyclical in nature. For example, if problems are encountered in one phase, then the process might include cycling back to an earlier phase. Let's start looking at each phase, and we'll start with the first one, the client startup. Some resources on consulting combine the activities described in this phase with those in the next, the contracting phase. However, combining these two phases often ignores very important activities that your client does even before you and your client agree later on to work together. That's why this phase is called the client's startup. You can learn a great deal about your client, their problem, and their organization by recognizing this extremely important phase. Your goals during this phase are to learn what was your client's nature and how he or she worked during the phase, for example, systematically or unorganized. And what was the context of the problem or the goal? For example, how long had it existed and what had your client done so far to address it? What were the results? How did your client decide to get a consultant? What can you learn about how your client made those decisions? And who were the initial key stakeholders involved in the problem or the goal? What additional information do you want to find out during your first meeting in the upcoming contracting phase? During this startup phase, you'll want to remember the guidelines for identifying the real current client that we talked about in the earlier CDI course, Roles, Goals, and Reasons in Consulting. And as a reminder, these virtual courses are meant to convey foundational knowledge. They are not meant to explain how to do each phase in detail, but you can get that from CDI's program, a program called Organizational Consulting. The goals of this contracting phase are to establish a good working relationship with your client based on openness and trust. Another is to understand your client's perception of the problem. And this perception may change as you learn more about the problem. You want to answer the important question, who is the current client? And this is probably your official client now. That is the person who will sign your paycheck. You'll also want your interpersonal skills and diversity skills from the previous course, Building Trust, Commitment, and Collaboration. If you're an or about the internal department, if you're an internal consultant. Learn about its culture and how its members prefer to make decisions and solve problems. An important question is the client really ready for the demands of a consulting project? You'll want a good answer to that during this phase. If so, you might even invite your client to start a project team to work with you. That is, a small group of people to help you ensure that your consulting is always useful to your client's organization. And you and your client should complete a formal agreement to proceed. For example, you both might sign a letter of agreement or a contract. One of the goals of the discovery phase is to continue to build a collaborative relationship between yourself, your client, and the project team. You already described to your client in the contracting phase how you prefer to work collaboratively and the benefits of working that way. The fact your client contracted with you suggests that he's open to working that way as well. So in this phase, you both begin practicing that kind of relationship. People who experience problems in organizations usually notice the symptoms of the problems first. So you want to get to the root cause of the problem now, working with your client and the team. That's another one of the goals of this phase. When you found that root cause, you'll need to do more research in order to find the best solution to the problem. The solution is often best conveyed as 5 to 7 overall recommendations or goals. Your client will agree on some or all of the goals, hopefully, and you should be sure that other key players in the organization agree on them too. The most important goal from this phase, though, is really to energize and mobilize the client to solve the problem, because now there's hope and focus to do something about it. By the way, during this phase, you'll want to remember the guidelines for responding to any questionable practices that we talked about in the earlier course, Standards, Practices, and Risks in Consulting. You also want to remember to adjust your consulting style and biases that you clarified in the course, Understanding Yourself as a Consultant. In the previous phase, Discovery and Feedback, you and your client conducted research to discover the causes of various issues. You generated recommendations and gained agreement. In this action planning phase, you focus on developing each of the recommendations into action plans. And the plans are closely examined to ensure that they are aligned and integrated in order to avoid any conflict or duplication. Then the plans are examined again to be sure they're all relevant, they're all realistic to accomplish. All of the plans are integrated into what you might call an overall change management plan. The primary goal of this implementation phase is to implement the change management plan, and the plan should solve the client's current problem. Another goal is to continually monitor the status of the implementation. It's not unusual during this phase that you encounter resistance from your client and their fellow employees. So you'll likely need your skills in dealing with resistance that we discussed in the course, Building Trust, Commitment, and Collaboration. It's very important during this phase to sustain progress of implementation according to the schedules on the plans, and that requires strong leadership skills in your client's organization. Research shows that one of the best ways to sustain change is to communicate status and successes to stakeholders. In this phase, you'll continually communicate that status and celebrate successes along the way. The overall goal of this phase, though, is to improve the client's organization not only by solving problems, but by cultivating learning for both of you. Now we're going to look at the evaluation phase. And the goals of this phase are to conduct evaluations about the results of the project to determine what was the client's problem originally and was it resolved? Was it solved according to what the project calls success or some other measure? And was it solved by the project or did something else occur that ended up solving it? Did the client adopt the necessary changes to ensure the problem will be resolved for the long term? For example, new strategies or structures, roles, and policies. If the problem was not resolved and the client did not adopt the changes, should the project cycle back to an earlier phase? You might even need to go back to the contracting phase to re-examine how a new project should be designed. Or are you and the client really ready to terminate the project? Termination can be done for a variety of reasons, and we'll discuss those in this next and final phase. The goals of this termination phase are to ensure a specific course of action based on the results of the evaluation, tie up any loose ends or forgotten tasks and project activities. Be sure that there's an ethical closure, meaning you either continue to work together or depart in a respectful and professional manner. And finally, that there's a psychological closure. That's a matter that's sometimes forgotten in projects. This course includes a handout that gives an overview of each of the phases in the collaborative consulting. Now is a good time to pause again to reflect on what you've heard. So in your learning journal, answer the following question. Do you use a systematic approach to consulting, that is, with specific phases? And if so, what are they? You might pause the video and give this some thought, perhaps discuss these questions again with some peers, but write your answers in your journal. As in the previous courses, your learning does not have to stop here. Again, consider these ideas to continue your learning. Find at least one application for the content. For example, how might you talk about it with colleagues or clients or use it in a project? And in your journal, answer the powerful questions in the section entitled After the Course. Those questions help you to really dig deep about your learning. Pursue some of the sources for additional learning listed in the course. For example, exercises, additional articles, online discussion groups, and books to read. Perhaps pick just one for now. Complete the post-assessment in the course and then compare it to the results from your pre-assessment you took earlier. Think about how much did you learn? And the evaluation for this course is another way to enrich your learning because it's not just to tell us how to improve the course. It's also an opportunity for you to reflect on your learning, including your role in it. Shortly after we get your completed evaluation, we will email you the slides from this video. This course is one of 12 in this series, Foundations of Organizational Consulting. Consider doing more of the courses and getting a certificate in organizational consulting. If you want to learn a lot more about the phases in the consulting process, consider CDI's program, Organizational Consulting. There's much more information about that too at consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org. We want to thank you for attending this video. If you ever have any questions or want to share feedback during the series, simply send an email to info@consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org. And again, thank you for your time during this video.